Hi everyone, so I'm Helen from the National Lottery Heritage Fund. Some of you may well sort of know us previously from our previous name of the Heritage Lottery Fund. We had a rebrand a couple of years ago just to bring us more in line with the lottery family. Now I'm based in the Leeds office and work across the north. And I work in the engagement team, so I work with groups and organisations before they put their applications in. So as I mentioned in the session earlier in the panel session, that we do have that pre-application advice service, and I'm part of the team that manages that. Next slide, please.
If this is going to work. There we go.
So as again, who are we? So quite a lot of you might be aware we're one of the National Lottery Good Causes. So every time you buy a lottery ticket or a scratch card, some of the money from that pink ticket or the scratch card or the online games goes directly to us to support projects that encourage people to become more actively involved in heritage. We're part of the National Lottery family, so there's ourselves, the National Lottery Community Fund, the Arts Council England and Sport England, and as I say, our money comes directly from the National Lottery, which is why we have a really strong focus on people and a wider range of people being involved within the project. Next slide. So I've just got a brief agenda for today, so I'm going to quickly go through sort of who we fund, the organisations that we can support, and our funding programmes, and then we're going to have a little bit of a time for questions to break it up a bit, and then we'll go through our funding outcomes, because we're an outcomes focused funder, and we'll go through some of the other things that we look for in projects. We've got some case studies, and then there'll be another opportunity for questions. Now I know Nikki's very kindly helping to facilitate, so she's keeping an eye on questions that are popping in the chat. So again, if you've got any questions as we're going along, pop them in the chat, and then we've got a break halfway through just to go through the questions that have come up at that point, and then we've got questions at the end as well that we'll address. Next slide, please. So what do we do? It's really simple. We're looking to fund projects that connect people and communities with their heritage. We can also support projects that help heritage organisations and organisations that deliver heritage activities regularly to become more resilient and in a better position for the future. Next slide, please. So firstly, as we're the National Lottery Heritage Fund, it's important to understand what we mean by heritage, because heritage is a word that means different things to different people. So you may already be thinking about a particular heritage theme for your project. Now, when we ask people the question, when we used to have the sort of in-person sessions, we'd always ask the question, what do you think of when you hear the word heritage? And quite often people will focus on sort of physical heritage, such as old buildings, museums and whatnot. But for us, we have a really broad definition of the word heritage. So it's everything from, as I say, built heritage right through to people's stories and what's important to them. Next slide, please. So for us, heritage is what's important to you and your community that you want to save. So it could be celebrating or recording stories and memories for future generations to enjoy. We have a really wide view of heritage, and we try not to set any definitions to it. We ask you to think about what is important to you and your community, whether it be people's stories and memories, cultural traditions, your local park or nature reserve or green space, people that have lived within your community in the past, the history of your local football, rugby, cricket club, wildlife and nature and landscapes. For us, heritage is all around us. Essentially, we're wanting to support heritage memories, stories, the heritage that matters to you and your community. So again, we've mentioned people a couple of times. We're very much a people-focused funder. So with that in mind, the best place to start really is with people, as heritage means very little without people there to value it. So projects are the strongest when they're rooted within their communities, meaningful and enabling people to learn more about the heritage that matters to them and sharing it with others. That's why it's one of our mandatory outcomes, which is ensuring that a wider range of people can be involved in heritage, as we want projects to have people at the heart of them. So when you are thinking about developing a project, make sure you talk to people about the potential project that you're wanting funding for, and that there's an interest in it and people wanting to be involved in it. Next slide, please. So who do we fund? Again, we can fund a really wide range of organisations. We fund heritage projects, not just heritage organisations. So any organisation that's wanting to deliver heritage activities, we can support them. You don't have to be a local history group or museum. You can be a community group, residents association. We fund a really broad range of organisations. We do need you to be a not-for-profit organisation with a constitution and a bank account, which is in the name of the organisation, so that if your application is successful, we can pay the grant into your account. We do fund private owners of heritage as well, up to the amount of £100,000, so long as public benefit of the project clearly outweighs any private gain. For any grants of over £100,000, the application would need to be led by a not-for-profit organisation. So again, our main focus is non-profit taking organisations. Next slide, please. So who do we fund? Here's a bit of a breakdown. Now, this is just a list of some of the types of organisations that we fund. It's not exhaustive, so don't worry if you don't see your organisation or an organisation like yours on the list. Like I said before, we can fund a really broad range of organisations. So as long as you're not for profit and have a constitution or some sort of governing document and a bank account in the name of your organisation, we can generally fund you. You don't have to be a registered charity to apply. And again, as mentioned earlier, we can fund private owners of heritage as long as the project has clear public benefits and they're wanting to extend the range of people that are learning about accessing and engaging with the heritage that they are custodians of. Next slide, please.
Sorry.
That's okay, don't worry.
Okay.
So during 2020, we closed most of our general grant programs, and we focused on supporting the heritage sector to adapt and respond to the immediate impact of COVID-19. In 2021, we then relaunched our programs again, but we've had a bit of a change in focus. So we've still got our standard grants programs, but what we're doing now is to look at how we can use our funding to help communities move forward from the COVID crisis. So how can heritage be used as a role to or as a tool to support communities, address needs that have emerged as a result of the crisis, and help communities and groups and organisations move forward. So what we're looking for in projects is, it doesn't have to directly be focused on sort of responding to COVID-19, but we do need to see how you've thought about how your project can maybe support communities moving forward. So if you had a project idea in mind previous to 2020, you've thought about it in the current context and how you can make sure it's really going to support communities moving forward now. So again, through the funding that we have on offer, we can support lots of really positive outcomes, so helping support well-being, reducing isolation. So there's a lot of things there that will help communities move forward that we can support through our funding. Next slide, please. So we've got a range of programs. We generally call them our sort of national lottery grants for heritage, and they're divided into 3 brackets depending on the amount of funding that you want. And again, depending on how much you want, we have slightly different requirements. Obviously, there's a chart on the screen that goes through the main points of each programme, but I'm going to go through a few key details below. So for projects that are grant requests of between 3,000 to 10,000. So the smallest grant award we make is 3,000. and projects looking for grants of between 3,000 to 10,000. There's no application deadline. You can submit an application whenever you're ready. They are quite reasonably straightforward applications, which are all available online, and they're based on the sort of awards for all sort of model, so they are reasonably straightforward. There's an 8-week turnaround from when we receive your full application to when we'll give you a decision. So we do try and turn applications around and get your decision as soon as possible. Now, for this threshold of grant, we generally fund projects that last no more than a year. Again, the reason for this is because we're looking at for our funding portfolio a reasonably small amount. It sometimes can be difficult to keep the momentum going for more than a year, and obviously it's a small amount of funding, so we're mindful of what you'd be able to do beyond that time frame with a small amount of funding. So we generally ask that your project lasts no longer than a year. Now, you don't have to submit any match funding, so you can look for 100% of the grant as long as it's between that threshold for this strand of our funding programme. And also we pay the grant upfront in a one-off payment. So if you request 9,000, if you're successful, you get that upfront, and then you just report on that at the end of the project. Now, for this level of funding, we run regular monthly workshops. We run webinars where we go through the program in more detail. We'll go through sort of top tips and whatnot. Now, on our website, there is in your area page, there's an event page section which goes through all of the upcoming workshops we've got. I think I had a note from a colleague this morning saying the next two, they're normally once a month, are booked up, but we are looking at rolling more out. So do keep an eye on it, and we'll keep details of upcoming workshops updated on there. Then for grants of on here, obviously it mentions projects, but for grants of 10,000 to up to 250,000, we call that our medium grants programme. So again, there's no application deadlines. You can submit an application whenever you're ready. What we do recommend is, because of the levels of competition, make sure you submit the application when you've prepared the best quality application that you can. You've got all the supporting documents. You've spoken to your local community as well as, so that their feedback can help you sort of plan and develop your project, so that you're putting in a really strong application. We are getting a lot of applications. There is competition, so do spend the time working on your application and submit it when you're ready. Again, like the smaller grants programme, we aim to give you a decision within 8 weeks, and projects can last up to 5 years. Now, if within that bracket, if you're looking for more than £100,000, we do require you to put 5% of the total project costs in as match funding. So this can be a mixture of money from your own reserves, other grants, trusts and whatnot, or it could be an element of in-kind. But again, we can discuss that with you. Now, for this level of grant programme, we do have what we call our pre-application advice service. So we, again, it's an online application form for the main programme, but you can submit an online project inquiry form so that you can get some feedback and support before you approach the application form. So we can give you a bit of a steer if it's something that we could support. We can offer advice and support, signposts and whatnot where appropriate, so that you have an idea whether this is a project that we can support before you approach the application form. Now, there is more information that's required for this programme than for the smaller grants programme, but again, it's because you're asking for a slightly larger amount, and we do, depending on the amount you're asking for, we do expect more from an application. So for example, if you're looking for £12,000, we wouldn't expect you to be providing the same level of information as an applicant who's looking for £200,000. So again, we take that case by case approach, and depending on how much you want, that would impact the amount of information you require to submit. But again, we would go through that with you in more detail if you're looking to apply and you put a project inquiry form in. Then I've put a bit of information about our large grants programme. As I say, I'm not sure if anyone's interested in that. That is a 2-round process. And for this programme, we do have deadlines which fall every quarter, sort of generally sort of end of February, March, sort of end of May, June, end of August, September, and then end of November, December. So we have quarterly slight deadlines for this level of grant request. And there is a mandatory EOI. So basically, you'd need to submit an EOI if you are interested in applying, and we would look to see whether this is something that we could potentially support, and then look at whether to endorse the expression of interest for you to then progress to a full application form. Now, projects under this programme can last up to 7 years, so it's a 2-round process with 2 full application forms in addition to the expression of interest. And there's a development phase and delivery phase. So as I say, projects can last up to 7 years. So roughly breaks down to up to 2 years to develop your project further, which we can support costs towards that, and then up to 5 years for delivery. But again, this is something we'd go through in more detail if you're interested in applying under this programme, and there is more detail on our website about this. For projects up to £1 million, it's a minimum of 5% contribution, and we would need to see that as sort of cash match, not just in kind. And then for projects that are looking for a grant of more than £1 million, we'd need a minimum of 10% of the total project costs contributed as match funding. And again, as mentioned, for this programme, there is a mandatory expression of interest that you need to submit before you look at applying. Now, what I would say in terms of sort of top tips, the most important thing is before you even consider approaching us about a programme, do have a look at our website. There's quite a lot of information for each sort of threshold of grant on there, and just have a read through it, see if it's something that looks like it'd be appropriate for you and what you're wanting to do. And then either, book onto a workshop or pop in an inquiry form, and we can then take it from there. But it is really useful just to have a look at the guidance before you decide whether to approach us for more advice and support. Next slide, please. Now, I'm aware that I've kind of rambled through that quite quickly, so I just thought we'd pause and see if there's any questions, and we can go through questions now, and then there is an opportunity at the end also to go through questions.
I haven't got any questions at the moment in the chat box. If anybody's got anything they want to pose verbally, then more than happy to do that.
If I may, just a quick question. Thank you, Helen. I'm sorry I missed the beginning. I got caught up in another meeting. With the medium and potentially long term, I know you do up to 5 years or up to 7 years. What is the average period that most of those projects run for?
For the medium grants amount, so you're talking sort of up to 250,000. We generally see most projects coming in at between 2 to 3 years. I mean, again, it depends on how much we're looking for, because if the smaller end, it sometimes will be a year project, but when you're looking at sort of the mid-range of that programme and higher end, you're talking about 2 or 3 years. Again, depending on the nature of the project, normally it takes a bit of a while to get up and running, and then actually develop it, delivering the project, and then sort of looking at what's happened afterwards and whatnot. So we normally see probably 2 to 3 years on the medium grants programme. On the large grants programme, it is dependent on what kind of project it is. So if you're looking at under that programme, we tend to fund, we get quite a lot of inquiries and applications for capital focused projects. So projects where there's some sort of, it's involving some sort of historical asset, which quite often we'll see maybe lasting between 3 to 5 years, because obviously they'd have to account for a period of time where if it's physical works to a building, those are taking place. Now, alongside that, you could certainly have a staff member working up resources, sort of engaging with the community, but often the sort of on the ground work is dependent on having the space ready. So we'd normally see them lasting a bit longer, so that you've got time to carry out the capital works and then really deliver and embed the educational sort of learning activities that you're doing, and you're giving it time to properly embed in So yeah, probably between about 3 to 5 years, and then in total with the development phase. And I don't want to go into too much detail about the large grants program, because I'm aware this it's probably not going to be appropriate for a lot of people. But what I would say is, if you are looking at a grant of over 250,000, hopefully you'll have my details from this, or if not, I'm sure that our details will be shared. Do drop me a line, I can talk about it in a bit more detail. But normally there'd be a development phase of a minimum of a year, and then delivery of actual money to deliver the project on the ground would be a minimum of about 3 to 5 years.
Thank you very much, Helen.
That's great. Has anybody else got any questions they'd like to pose? I just got a quick question, Helen, just with regards to this sort of, you mentioned that the small and medium grants don't have any deadlines. It's kind of a rolling program, and the third ones meet quarterly. Is there a particular time of year when it's best to apply to your funding programs, in terms of when you've got more money about, or when you've got money that you need to spend before the end of the year? Is there a year when a particular time of the year when it's best to submit an application?
Not really. The way we work it is, although there isn't a deadline, we have monthly batch decision meetings. So again, we look at roughly an 8-week turnaround for applications, from when we get the fully completed application to when we give you a decision. So we try, and normally most groups get a decision in between sort of 6-7 weeks often, but we try and give you a decision within 8 weeks. But as such, because we have monthly batch meetings, we profile our budget right across the year. So we have, and that way, if for any reason there's any chance of being an underspend, it will roll over and be divided amongst those meetings that are left in the year. Again, similarly with the large grants programs, the budget's profiled over the 4 quarterly decision meetings. So depending on how you look at it, there probably isn't a good time to look at it, but sort of maybe, beginning of the year, obviously, and we work on a financial year, April to March. Obviously, we've got the new sort of budget allocations, and then towards the end of the year, depending on how things have gone, we even may have a little bit left over, or it may be that we've had a sort of, if we've received a lot of applications, it may be a bit tighter, but we would always have money to support projects. So we're never going to run out across the course of the year. Again, that's probably not answered your question in terms of best time. I'd say the best time to apply, and I'm sure people, when we say this, people think we're just saying it, but it is when you've got the best application developed that you can put in, because that's what's going to get you the funding. A strong application where it's clear that you've spoken to your community and the people you want to engage, so they want to be involved. What you're doing will actually support them and meet their needs. That's what we're looking for. And whether it's the beginning, middle or end of the year, if you've got a really good project, then hopefully, we should be able to support it.
That's reassuring to hear that your money's kind of staggered over the year, and there isn't a kind of big pot that's all spent by June, and then you're looking. So it is reassuring to know you've got money to spend across the year. So yeah, thank you for that.
The decision makers are really, the panel's always very mindful that, just because we've got the money, we don't have to spend it all. So if we haven't got projects that are meeting a certain sort of quality threshold, we wouldn't just spend because we've got the money. We would just reprofile that if for the rest of the year if we've had an underspend.
That's brilliant, thank you. I've just got a quick question from Kathy Alldale. Alldale, sorry Kathy, I haven't got my glasses on. Do you want to pose your question, Kathy?
Very recently, literally in the last 2 or 3 days, we've submitted a preliminary inquiry on behalf of Knaresborough Museum Association, and what I wanted to know is, if you look at an initial inquiry like this and you see there's say a few problems with it, does the applicant still get allocated a mentor and get advice about going on to the next stage, which is submitting a grant application?
Yep, the person that's been allocated to you is my colleague Rosie. So if you haven't heard already, she will be in contact within the next week or so. The way we work is any inquiry, whether someone phones up, if they're looking at a smaller grant where we don't have the inquiry service, and you phone up or sending an email, or for yourselves where you're looking at the medium programme and you put an inquiry in, every single inquiry is allocated to a member of the North team. And the North team, there's about 11 of us work across the North. So Rosie, she's based in Leeds, who's been allocated during inquiry. But again, we look at it on capacity depending on how many inquiries we've got in each week. And you will get sort of feedback, and depending on the project, whether you've had experience of delivering previous projects, you've maybe had funding from us before or not, we'd decide whether it's maybe appropriate to have a meeting to go through it in more detail. So every single inquiry, no matter what form it comes in, will get a response. But depending on the support we think you would benefit from, if it's something we support, will depend on what sort of support you get. Because for some groups it's just a few sort of pointers, and they're more than happy to just get on with it. But again, if it's clearly something we can't support, we'll be really upfront with you. But again, the inquiry service is it's not a pass or fail, so you can still submit an application, but it's for us to give you a bit of an indication as to how it's likely to fare, and if there's any bits that you could, that you'd need to strengthen before you consider putting it in. If you're looking at the larger grants programme, 250 upwards, that is a sort of pass or fail. We would decide whether to encourage you to submit an application or not, but for anything under that level, you'll always get sort of feedback and support.
Thanks, Helen. And I just got a quick question as well. Would you consider an essential repairs project to a Grade 2 listed church?
I'm going to briefly touch on this in the presentation a bit later on, but all projects that we fund have to meet what we term it as a mandatory outcome, which is basically ensuring that a wider range of people are involved in the project. So we wouldn't, a project that's purely focused on repairs or capital works isn't going to be successful. It's just not going to stand up in competition. What we'd need to see is how are you going to use, what can you use the space for, in terms of involving people in the heritage you've got. So if it's a listed church, is there any interest in sort of stained glass windows that you could look at? We've had projects where they've sort of brought out and looked at the stories that are told within the windows, or the history of the church. I mean, it might be that you've got a sort of interesting characters that are buried within the churchyard. I've got a case study about a church project a bit later on, actually. But basically, we're not going to fund just repairs. So if there isn't some sort of resources to get people involved, so if it's that whole build it, they will come, or build it, they won't. You've repaired the building, but what are you going to do to attract people beyond general worship? And we'd need to see more information about that for us to consider a project focusing on repairs.
Great stuff. Should we go back to your presentation, and then we'll take any more questions at the end? I'll just share your screen again. Okay.
Yep, so if we just jump to the next slide.
I can get it to work. There we go.
So I mentioned a bit earlier on about this year we've still got our same funding strategy, but we've just refocused it a little bit to make sure that it's actually relevant for where we are now, how communities are, what the needs of communities are. So we've kind of had a bit of a step back and rethink over the past year. So for us, this is not a normal year. What we're asking is that all projects need to think about the current context of the pandemic. So how has it affected the heritage and the communities that you represent and that you are working with, and what can you do to best support the communities at this time? So think about what you'd need to do to carry out your project. For example, so when you plan your project, think about, for example, if you need to put any sort of mitigations in for if there's any changes in government restrictions. So I know that we're out of a period of restrictions now, but previously we have seen that yo-yoing. So when people, have lockdowns and whatnot. So when people are developing projects, what we're doing at the moment is saying, just think about how you can respond, how you can meet the needs of people within the community now to help them move forward. So is this project needed now? Could it wait a year's time, or is it something you need to do now? And if so, why? And why is it important for your community? But then if you are going to deliver a project now, have you thought about the risks that could happen? Now, again, I totally appreciate we're on shift and sands, things keep changing, but think about ways that you could tweak your project. So if for any reason, and touch wood, it won't happen, but if we were to go into restrictions, could you do some of the sessions online maybe? Do you need to factor in a little bit of a cushion in your contingency in your budget, just to make sure that you've got provisions if you need to change things slightly? So what we're looking for is that it's for projects that are thinking about the situation we're in now and how you can make a project that's a bit more agile and fit for purpose for the current sort of climate that we're in. Again, all projects must meet our mandatory outcome, a wider range of people involved in heritage, and I'm going to go through this a little bit more in the next slide. And also we've got another outcome that we're really focusing on at the moment, which is relating to the environment. So again, what we want to do is we want people to think a bit more about how they can have a positive benefit on the environment through their project. And again, I've got a slide coming up shortly that will go into this a bit more detail, because I do appreciate it may seem a little bit daunting. And then we also ask that projects think about evaluation. So when you're doing your project, all funders will ask you to evaluate it. So what we're wanting to look at and what we're wanting to hear about is what difference has your project made, what's gone well, what hasn't, what do you want to tell us about your project once it's finished? And ideally what we need to see is that you've put a budget in your costs for evaluation. So it doesn't matter how small your project is, make sure you put a budget in so that you've got resources to evaluate it. And we normally suggest round about 2 to 7% of your total project costs are accounted for evaluation. And again, when you're looking at evaluation, it's useful to know sort of your baseline data of where are you at now. So which groups are you working with at the moment? If you're looking at maybe heritage of your local area and awareness of it, what's people's awareness at the moment? So get that baseline data so that then you've got something to measure it against as the project progresses, and think about how you'll measure it. So again, do think about evaluation and make sure you put a cost in your budget for it, any resources you need to enable you to do that. And then the final thing is, again, I know we had this discussion earlier on in the panel meeting about project-based funders, but we are a project-based funder. So that means we're not able to fund work that has taken place before you've had a positive decision from us. So make sure that you don't put any work that has started before we would give you a decision and permission to start the project in your project costs, because we won't be able to support them. Also, if you're looking at delivering a project that is sort of time limited, or you're looking to start for a particular date because you may be looking to link into a particular celebration or something like that, make sure that you allow enough time to apply and for your project to be assessed and then get the project up and running, because again, we can't fund any work that's already taken place. Next slide, please. So mentioned outcomes a couple of times. So we're an outcomes-based funder. So we want you to describe the difference your project will make. So again, when you plan your project, what we're looking for is information about the outcomes. So outcomes are different to outputs. So outputs are the things that you will do or you'll produce, like workshops, exhibitions, school packs, maybe information boards, and then the outcome is the difference that will occur as a result of the project, so the journey travelled. So what we're wanting you to tell us about is what difference will this project make? What difference will it make to the people that you're working with? What difference will it make to the heritage that you're focusing on? So again, we want to tease a bit more about that out of you when you're preparing your application. Now, on our website, we do have a section that focuses on outcomes, and within the guidance, it does give you examples of the type of things that you could that we'd be looking for. So there is more detail on our website. So I don't want to bore you with too much of it now. It's far better to sort of look at that when if you are going to apply, when you're approaching the application form. And then again, if you've put an inquiry form in, you can always speak to us about it in more detail if you're a bit unsure. Next slide, please. So for us, we've identified 6 priority outcomes that we're focusing on for this financial year, 2021 to 2022, which are up here. So we've got our mandatory outcome, which is a wider range of people who will be involved in heritage. And that is because, as I say, we're a national lottery funder. Our main focus is ensuring that the wider community, national lottery playing public, are going to benefit from the investment we're making within your project. So we want to see how you're going to involve people and what they'll be doing and how it will impact them and benefit them. So that's our mandatory outcome. So again, sort of linking into the question about the essential repairs, carrying out roof repairs isn't going to enable you to meet that mandatory outcome. So we do need to see that you've thought about who's going to be involved or using that resource, what will they be doing, and what will be the benefit of them being involved, what will they get out of it, whether it be sort of learning new skills, learning more about a particular story about the local community that was unknown. We need to know more about what they will get out of the project. And then we've also got 5 other outcomes that sit around that. So local economy will be boosted. So again, that links into sort of that place agenda, which I know a lot of funders are looking at the moment, how we can benefit local communities. We also want to see that your organisation is going to come out of this in a better position. So how can our funding help make you more resilient? So it could be that as part of the project, you may be expanding your volunteer base. You've got more volunteers to help you that you've recruited as part of the project. It may be that you factored in some training for yourself and maybe some of your board members to expand the skill base that you've got within your organisation. So and also just through delivering a project, it could build your capacity to deliver further projects and sort of wider ranging projects. So again, we want to see how you will benefit from it as an organisation. Also, people developing skills. Again, hopefully as a result of the project, the area will be a better place to work, live and visit, and that it's going to improve people's well-being, which again is really important at the moment. Now, obviously that seems like an awful lot for one project to achieve. So what I do want to stress is the only outcome that we are expecting projects to achieve is that mandatory outcome. So that's what we're essentially assessing against for every project, that every project will have provisions and activities to enable a wider range of people to get involved and learn about the heritage that you're focusing on. That's the mandatory outcome that all projects must meet. You don't technically have to meet any other outcomes. No project really is probably going to meet all of those really well. So what we want to see is, rather than trying to stretch your project and loosely link it to all of the 6 outcomes, that you focus on the outcomes that your project will meet really, really well. And that might just be the mandatory outcome about involving people in heritage. It could be the mandatory outcome and maybe the skills-based outcomes, that people will develop skills maybe through volunteering, and really talk about how you will achieve those outcomes well. Would far rather see a project achieving 1 or 2 outcomes really well than a project that's very loosely linking into all 6. Again, those projects that are achieving outcomes really well are the ones that are more likely to be successful than those that are trying to just be all things to all people. Make sure it's focused. Make sure you really tell us about which outcomes you think you can really achieve well through the activities that you're delivering and the work you're wanting to take place. Next slide, please. So obviously mandatory outcome, I do appreciate it can be a little bit daunting. And again, we've got quite a lot of information on our website. So, again, please do look on there. But just to give you, a bit of a pointer, what we want to do through the main aim of this outcome is to ensure that communities are better represented in heritage, that a wider range of people are involved in heritage that maybe wouldn't normally be involved in a project of this nature. So that's the main focus of it. So what we'd recommend is, firstly, do your research, make sure you know about who your current audiences are or your service users, depending on the sort of work you do. It could be that it's just members or volunteers that are currently within your group, or it could just be people in the very immediate sort of local community or groups that you regularly work with. So this will be your baseline. So you're looking at who do you already involve, but then think about who you're not involving. And again, that's within your community. So are there any groups or communities that you're not currently engaging with that are within your community? And then look at sort of start exploring the reasons why they're not engaging with you, why you're not working with them. So again, best way to do this is to just get out there and talk to people. It could be that there's some barriers to people being involved. It could be that if you're a group that maybe does sort of work mainly on during the daytime, it could be that people are prevented from getting involved because they only have sort of weekends or evenings free, and changing the way you program activities might mean that more people can get involved. It could be that you're mainly working with sort of older people within your community, so it might be worth having a chat to some local youth groups or schools to see if they would be interested in being involved in the project that you're looking to deliver, and if so, what work or what barriers what work could you do to make sure that they are able to get involved? So are there any barriers that you could look at addressing to make sure that they can get involved in projects? It could be anything from providing sort of transport costs for volunteers, if you're looking at certain, depending on the groups, childcare provision, so interpretation, so that you're interpreting maybe leaflets in different languages. So again, look at who you're involving, who you're not involving. Is the reason why certain people aren't involved? Then do they actually want to be involved? And then if so, what can you do to make it far more accessible for the community as a whole? So, carry out, do your consultation basically. Next slide, please, sorry. So again, I mentioned that we have a focus on environmental sustainability. So again, like a lot of funders, we're looking at projects that are going to have a more positive impact on the environment. Again, I do appreciate this may seem very daunting, for a small project who's maybe just looking at getting people together to do a small oral history project, talk about memories of the local area and do an exhibition. And you may be thinking, well, what can we do? How can we do this? We, as a funder, we always look at projects on a case-by-case basis, and what we're looking for is that step change. So what are you doing now, and what realistically could you do to sort of address this? So for small projects, it may just be small sort of interventions, such as you're looking at reducing the amount of printed material. It could be that you're doing some of the resources, you're doing some of the publicity through online, through social media and whatnot, rather than just leaflets. It could be that you're looking at encouraging people to use public transport if you're looking at some sort of site-based sort of heritage. So that there's lots of small steps that you can do that will really contribute towards our focus on improving the environment and environmental sustainability. Again, our website has some information on this with lots of tips. Also, there is a really good organisation called Fit for the Future, which has a lot of resources and support telling you how you can make those small steps and small changes. It is a membership fee sort of focused organisation, but you can include the membership fee within your project costs. Again, as I say, it is really, really important to point out that we would look at this depending on how much you want. So an organisation that's only wanting 4,000 to do a small community project is not going to have to do the same as an organisation who's wanting to do a project that is maybe $1 million, and they're looking at a large capital project. The interventions that project would make would be significantly more than the smaller projects. So again, it's what's appropriate for yourselves. I mean, it could even be simple things like if it's sort of a churchyard project, put in sort of bat boxes and, you know, sort of bug hotels and stuff in. So it could be, you know, simple interventions, but it's what's right for your project and what is a realistic step change for yourselves. But again, there's more information on the website about this. I've got a couple of case studies. I am aware that we're sort of quite short for time. So what I might do is, if we jump to the questions, and then if we've got enough time, I'll go through the case studies afterwards. But I just want to make sure that if anyone has any questions, that they've got time to have those answered. And then I can always send you examples of case studies afterwards if it would be helpful.
Thank you, and everybody will receive a copy of the presentation with the case study information on. Helen, we've got one question from Simon again. Given the emphasis is on what works and sharing that, have you come across any new and innovative ideas about sharing knowledge?
What we've seen recently is we've seen more sort of partnership approaches, so organisations working more closely in partnership. And also we have funded this again, which is a bit of a shout out actually, or promotion for you all, a large scale funding programme that we had, we launched back in early 2020, which was looking at business support and sort of building capacity and resilience in organisations, a business support programme. There's a number of 4 organisations in England that we funded under that programme. Some of them operate in this area where they're looking at offering support and training for organisations that are wanting to look at things such as income generation, governance models and whatnot. So there should be more details about that on our website, but if not, I can send you links to the organisations, because they have sort of training that we're funding that would help smaller organisations. But in terms of, you know, for smaller projects, it could be that you're looking at that sort of train the trainer bubble effect. So it could be this, you know, you get someone in to help support you with some training, and then you're able then to train people to sort of share that sort of learn that training. But then in terms of learning from the project, it could be that you're involved in sort of local network groups. So again, going back to, you know, really accounting for evaluation, you know, think about, you know, how you can pitch your evaluation so that you can maybe share some of those best practice examples, top tips. What went wrong is always as useful as what went right, because it could save someone falling into, you know, that pitfall. You know, so again, you can factor that in and think about any networks you could share that within.
That's brilliant, thank you. Has anybody got any other questions they'd like to pose? There's no more in the chat. If anybody wants to either put their hand up or type anything in the chat, then please do so. I've just got a quick one on what the sort of common mistakes or reject reasons are on applications, just so to get a feel for why people aren't being successful.
At the moment, as I say, we're quite lucky that we do have resources for that sort of pre-application support, so that we can, by the time people are putting applications in, some of those main issues have sort of been addressed. So in terms of those groups that have submitted applications, one of the main things we're seeing at the moment is that it's not clear. It could be a nice project, but it's not really clear whether people are actually wanting to get involved in it. So again, you know, we want to know that you've spoken to your local community, and again, you've got your project idea, which is a starting point, but then you build on it and you tweak it depending on what sort of people are feeding back to you. And so we want to see that the project has evolved as a result of the needs of your community. We also want to see that you've got, you know, relevant groups that you'd need to make this project successful involved. So again, if you're looking at working with older people, for example, you've actually maybe got it could be some older people's groups, age concern or whatever, you've maybe got letters of support from them saying that you know, they're wanting to be involved in the project, or you've maybe spoken to them just to make sure that what you're doing is right for that user group, and you've factored in any concerns that they may have. And then again, we are seeing projects, but quite often they're projects that haven't had advice, where again they focus purely on capital, so just wanting a porta cabin to run activities out of, but they've not told us about the activities or put in any money for those activities, so it's just the money for the budget for the porta cabin, or just pure repairs, and those unfortunately aren't successful at the moment. The more you're asking for, the more information we'd require about what it is you're wanting to do and the activities that you're going to run. So it is really, what I would say is, you've got us here, we are a resource, we're paid to help you. Put in an inquiry form so we can give you a steer, and make sure use us, we're here, we can help you, give you tips on how to put in a stronger application. So just make sure you access that support.
That's great. I mean, it's lovely to see a funder that's been so open to conversation directly with you and helping them through the application process. I assume that you're happy for groups to contact you if they're unsuccessful and have a discussion about why they may have been unsuccessful.
I mean, what we do is we are trying to, it's interesting because one of the questions that was raised earlier is about why funders, a lot of them don't give particularly comprehensive feedback, and a lot of the time it is purely down to capacity, that they just haven't, there's that many applications, staff haven't got the time. But what we do try and do is, where projects have been unsuccessful, if it's maybe like a big organisation like one of the wildlife trusts and they've not been successful, the reason big organisation, they've got funding experts, they're resilient enough if you give them a few pointers that they can go away, improve it and stick it in, but stick it back in, they can get on with it. But for smaller community groups, it could be a real knock, and it could be the difference between them having the confidence to apply or not. So what we try and do is, projects that are unsuccessful, when we're making those decisions, we will discuss if we're not able to support it at this time, and sometimes it's just that we haven't got enough money on the table, we will look at a step forward. So it could be that the assessing officer will have a chat with, say, myself, and then name me in the feedback letter, saying, contact Helen and she can go through with you how you can put in a stronger application. So we try and do that. We try and do more of a handover, so that organisations that maybe wouldn't have the confidence or maybe don't have the resources to invest in putting in another application have got support to help them sort of build a stronger application.
That's great stuff. So by all accounts, it's go and get some support from the Heritage Fund. They are there to help you with your applications, and they'll guide you through the whole process.